My name's Ash Rocket. I'm one of the tutors at Yoobee colleges over in Wellington. I teach Web and Graphic Level 5. I'm just going to run you guys through a real quick tutorial in Adobe Lightroom Classic. And so one of the things we're going to look at is how to get the best out of your photos, just really quickly, just using a few of the tools. Um, yeah, so let's jump into it. So you guys should be able to see my screen now, and you should see this picture of this cat. So it's a photo I took a couple of years ago, and you can see there's a couple of things that we need to fix with it first and foremost. So what we'll do is this is sort of the general library view for Adobe Lightroom Classic. Usually you'll see photos like this. I've just included just the one photo for now, but normally you'd see a whole album of photographs that you'd been out taking throughout the day. So I'm just going to focus on this one. Now at the top right, you'll see there's library, develop, map, book, etc. We just need to click on develop. Once we've clicked on this, we'll see a couple of different options. Now, if you're familiar with Adobe software in the past, you'll see that a few of these might look similar to what you might have seen in, for instance, say Photoshop. You've got contrast, you've got things like texture, saturation, and you've also got, if you scroll down, things like sharpening. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, you'll be familiar with those. Cool. So at the top here, we've got what's called the histogram. Now this shows us all the different areas throughout the photo where we've got blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, whites. So it kind of moves along the spectrum from black through to white. And you can see as I hover over these, it actually highlights on the right hand side where those settings can be found. So we can see here there's actually quite a lot of levels being shown around the black and shadows area of the photo. Not really any whites or highlights to be seen, otherwise there'd be this sort of gray area here. So what we need to do is first and foremost, let's sort of sort out the alignment of this photograph, because as you can see, I probably took this crouching down. I can't really remember now, but I was probably crouching down. And when you're crouching, you might, things might go a little bit off. So we'll need to straighten this out so it's nice and horizontal. So if you click on this button here, the crop overlay, also you can just press R on your keyboard, you'll get this crop overlay. Now this is a non-destructive crop, which means if we change the size of it and then click OK, if we ever wanted to change that in future, we can click it again and you can see it retains the whole image here. So what we'll do is we'll just sort of hover our mouse over the top right or top left of corner, and we'll just drag it around so that we can see that our grid lines up with the line where the wall hits the floor just here. You can also try and align it against the edge of the gate or the door here on the right hand side. And once you're done, you just double click and we've got a nice straight image. So that's working really well. So the next thing we'll need to do is increase our exposure. So exposure is essentially just the overall, well, it's in the name, it's exposure. So how bright and how light or how dark the photo is. So you'll see if I drag this down, we lose all the light from the image, and vice versa, we can actually increase that. So exposure can do a lot to your photograph very, very quickly. Normally, exposure is the thing that you want to try and get right initially when taking the photograph, but that's not always the case. So we'll just bump that up a little bit, just so that we can see a little bit more about what we're dealing with. Cool, so that's looking pretty good. Below that, we've got contrast. Contrast, if we bring that right up, I'll push it right up, so way too far. You can see there it's really pushing the difference between light and dark, okay? So we don't really want to see that. And if we go the other way, you can see it actually flattens everything out, makes everything kind of seem washed out. Also not what we want. So we'll just push this up a little bit, probably to about sort of 20 or 30. What that's going to do is it's going to sort of create a little bit more difference between our tones. So if we zoom in here, we can see that the dark areas on the fur are now contrasting nicely with the white areas, which is cool. Now, next, what we can do is individually control highlights, shadows, whites and blacks as well. So if we wanted to really push those highlights up, as you can see there, when I push this up, the floor and the white bits of fur on the cat start to like sort of glow, which is pretty cool. So we'll do that just a little bit. Okay, so it's sort of like a way to initially control the contrast from one side as opposed to controlling both sides at the same time. Cool. And then you've got shadows. So I actually think we need to bring those shadows up a little bit because we're losing a bit of that texture in her fur. So if we bring this up, we can actually now see that she's actually got these stripes on her back. So that's really cool. So we can see that now. All right. So next, we'll probably just want to bring in a little bit of color. So usually, you would think saturation would be the thing that would either drain or add color to an image, and you'd be right. However, usually when I edit a photo, I like to use vibrance. The reason I like to use vibrance is because it sort of retains the, I suppose, the detail a little bit better. Because if I bring this right up, it adds in a lot of color, and it kind of destroys the image a little bit, almost too much. But if we drag saturation up, it might look like it's doing the same thing, but you're actually losing a lot of that detail. It's kind of not too obvious here, but typically vibrance is a little bit softer. So if you drag your vibrance slider up just a little bit, but about sort of 20, 30, it's just enough to kind of help the image pop, but not too much. Cool. Now, one thing we just forget about at the top here is the color temperature of the image. Now, color temperature is all about sort of how cold or how warm your image looks. And so this can be created in a few different ways. Often if you're shooting photos inside at night and you've got the lights on inside your house, usually those lights will be a warmer tone. Some lights can be fluorescent, it can be quite white and cold. But yeah, for the most part, they tend to be warmer. So this is where you would sort of counteract that. Now, the idea here is that you're trying to find the exact balance between warm and cold lights. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of blue in this image. Even in some of the shadows, you can see that there's some blue tones sort of here, over here, and even down below around here. So we need to try and push this to a little bit warmer to try and balance out some of that cold light that's sort of coming through. So if we just drag this up a little bit, there we go. We can start to see now it just helps to balance it out. So we've increased that warm tone and sort of removed that, I suppose, that colder tone. Great, cool. Now, as we're talking about crop before, I've just noticed, I think it's probably a good idea that we just crop this image in just a little bit so that we can create a little bit more balance between how much I suppose, how much bush and plant life we've got on the left and right side of the cat. So if we can make this sort of sit nice and tidy in the middle there, something like that, we now see straight away we've got a sort of less unbalanced image with the cat sitting nicely in the center here. Okay, cool. So most of this other stuff I would normally go through with you, but just a quick tutorial. Do have a play around and sort of, feel free to Google what some of these things do, and even just try it, just drag things around, see what they do. The great thing about Adobe programs is you can just press Command or Control Z and it will just send you straight back to where you were. So there's no sort of permanent damage that you can do to your images. So you can see here I'm just dragging these around. I'm just seeing what they do to my image. It's always good to learn by just doing something. Great stuff. Okay, so now sharpening. I'll just talk about sharpening, and I think that'll probably do it. So something that sharpening, people with who are new to photography, they tend to over sharpen things quite often. And so usually when I sharpen something, you have this neat little window here. I like to try and find a point of detail. So actually this nose and the eye here is perfect. So that means that I can now see the image as a whole here, and I can see a sort of closer, more detailed part right here. So by default, it's usually set to whatever your camera settings would have been at the time. In this case, we've got 40, 1, 25, etc. I'm just going to drag this up a little bit, not much, just like 10. The radius, what I'm going to do is increase that by a small amount. Now, radius is talking about the size of the pixels, how big the pixel sharpening should be. And then detail is, you know, I suppose all the little in-between parts where colors shift and change inside all those pixels. Because remember, images are built from pixels. Cool. So I tend to just drag it up just a little bit. It doesn't look like it's making a whole heap of difference. But if we turn this layer on and off, you can see the difference there. Look at her eye as I turn this on and off. So that's turning off the settings to default, and that's turning them on. So it's just a subtle amount of sharpening, but it's not completely destroying those pixels that make up this image, so that when we zoom in, we don't lose all of that detail. So if I turn this on and off, just adds that little bit of sharpness to it. It's often those subtle details that make the biggest difference. Cool. All right, so that is basically it. Now, one thing you can do right down the bottom is just add a little bit of a vignette. So in this case, because we've got a singular focus point right here, or focal point, sorry, I have a singular focal point being the cat, a small highlight priority, which in other words is just a vignette. A vignette is just like a black or white sort of surrounding shape. It's mostly kind of feathered, like a gradient, and that just goes around the outside there. So I just tend to do a nice subtle vignette on some of these things just to help push your eye into the focal point of the image, which in this case is this cute little cat. Cool. So there we have it. That's basically just I suppose, the quick intro into some of the settings that you can use in Adobe Lightroom Classic. Now, this is not to be confused with Adobe Lightroom, which has the same name essentially. It's just a slightly newer, more simplified version of this older software. I personally like using this. I think it has a lot more control. You can see a lot more of what you're actually doing in real time. And I also like the organized sort of library aspect of this software as well. Cool. Now, I'll just show you this last little thing here. Now, down the bottom, you can see you've got, just on the left-hand side here, you've got loop view, which is basically just the view that we're in now. It means that we can zoom in and out. And then you've got reference view, and you've got cycles between before and after. So it's usually symboled, these two little Y symbols next to each other. If you click this, what it does is it shows you what the image did look like before and what we have now. So you can see that we've made a huge difference to this image, just making those few little adjustments and not overdoing it too much, just popping out those colors, controlling those highlights, shadows, a little bit of exposure, tweaking that white balance, and adding a little bit of sharpness to it as well. So you can see, look at that huge difference that we've made. Cool. Well, I hope you guys found this useful. Good luck with all your studies, and keep working. Thanks a lot.